private sector. We have presenters with decades of experience. So to echo Aaron's point, let's enjoy ourselves, let's talk to each other, let's network, let's dive deeply into these different activities. And enjoy yourselves. Thank you for being here. So Mahesh made the point that we are getting towards the Global Plastics Treaty, hopefully the culmination and the agreement of it next year. Not the end of the process, but perhaps the beginning of the end. 1997, we first started to identify a global garbage patch. 2015, Janet Jembeck did some very good maths. We might not all agree with that maths, but it catalyzed our industry. Essentially, without that report, I don't think we would be where we are now. And as we come closer to the Global Plastics Treaty ratification agreement, we begin to look more and more at how we're going to fund that, how we are going to move forward, what information we're going to use, what techniques we're going to use. We've got a lot of money, time invested in digitization, which will allow us to measure much more effectively, and with the ability to measure, that we then get into the ability to fund. And this entire workshop is looking at those mechanisms, those approaches, those ideas of funding. We've established that there are funding gaps, and we're going to learn how we can possibly fill them, whether that's from ADB, whether that's from government sources, whether that's from private sector, private funding. We have everybody in the room, so we have a real opportunity with UN, with COBSI, to understand the different approaches, the different opportunities. And the reality of it is this is going to end up being a blended approach, a collaboration. And I think that is evidenced by the people in the room. I'm not even going to try and list out everybody who's here because it's been done 2 or 3 times, but it is collaboration. We're all here, we're all learning, we're all working together. We've all worked together to get here, and we will hopefully continue to work together to move forward, implement, and achieve. So if we get the first slide, please. So financing gap, huge, massive, big number, can't even contemplate it. You start to think of they just become tokens at that point. It's no longer money in your pocket. 1.64 trillion, lots of different ideas about that number. I think we can all agree that it is a big number. And that is not going to be achieved just by governments. It's not going to be achieved just by private sector. It's not going to be achieved by donors, by multilateral development banks. It's going to be achieved by all of us working together. Different ways to reduce plastics, different ways to avoid plastics, different ways to deal with the plastics, the legacy pollution that is already out there. Now, Asia is a hot spot. Oh, go back. There we go. Asia is a hot spot, and it's an interesting title. It's, as we mentioned, Janet Jembeck, unfortunately, Asia was identified as a primary point of leakage, but it also gives us this opportunity to really address that. And I know we were in Vietnam last week, and there is issues that we shouldn't be that high on the list. And I think we now agree, and I think when you speak to Jenna, she will also agree that math is not quite as good as it could have been, but benefit of hindsight, it did get us all to pay attention. The reality of it is there is a huge opportunity here for us to invest in plastics management, circular economy, substitution, avoidance. There's many, many entry points. And as government officials, government departments, identifying those entry points, working out that capacity building, that enabling environment to let everybody enter the market, let everybody help is really key. Upstream, downstream, we tend to go to waste management and recycling because it's somewhere that we're all comfortable. It's something we've been doing for a long time. But the reality of it, as Mahesh mentioned, is that turn off the tap. We need to be more aspirational. We need to move up the waste pyramid. We need to look at that avoidance, that substitution, that better practice. And that's generational. The people in this room, we're trying to behave better, but the reality of it is our children, our children's children will be the ones who really embrace sustainability on a much larger community scale. The Global Plastics Treaty, is timely. It is, hopefully the end of the beginning. As we get that ratified, it gives us that solid mechanism, that solid agreement to build on and move forward, which we haven't had yet. We've had a consensus, we've had a movement, but we've not had that anchor point. And the role of governments, as we know, is You are dealing with a community, you're dealing with public safety, public health, you're dealing with your countries. We're here to support as we try and increase that sustainability, increase your capacity, your environments, your capability to help manage these sustainability issues, these environmental issues. Not just with plastics, but with all types of challenges. But certainly, whilst it is not totally your responsibility, you are the focus through which we all work. So we're hoping, as we move through the next couple of days, talk to us, work with us, help us all learn. Next slide, please. So there are people in this room who know far more about financing than I do, and I'm sure some people have some different definitions of these. But not everybody in the room is finance-based. Not everybody in the room has finance background. So just some terminology that we're looking at as we talk about different phrases. And even between different institutions, we have different ideas. But partner, person who has a stake in the project, actually has money, actually has something, we call it skin in the game in the old days, but you can't use that phrase anymore. But you have that involvement in the project, whereas a stakeholder is not somebody who's necessarily invested in the project, but somebody who is affected or can be affected by that. Mechanism versus instrument. You're already in the presentations this morning, you've heard this phrase, mechanism. So the way we've looked at it is, the instrument is the project, is the product. So like the car loan, whether that is a private sector loan, whether it's a policy-based loan. The mechanism is how is that cash transferred? How is that managed? Is it a direct transfer to the project? Is it a direct transfer to the government that is then disseminated to projects? Donor versus investor. Again, it's a blurred line, but for the purposes of our workshop and what we're doing over the next couple of days, donor being organizations, governments who are perhaps not expecting returns in pure cash. They're expecting terms in ESG, in environmental progress, in debt for nature swaps, versus investors who are perhaps a little bit more cash focused, return focused. And again, that might not be pure capitalism, but they are looking for that return in terms of money returned on their investment. Public versus private. Public funding coming from government budgets, through taxes, through EPR, through fees. Private sector coming from capital markets, institutions, individual investors, individual banks. And de-risking. So this is something that I spend a lot of my time doing, and when we get through to our panel discussion later on with David and Deanne, a lot of that conversation is about how do we de-risk projects? How do we de-risk innovative projects? How do we cope with new ideas? I was talking with my colleagues from Vietnam about the Global Plastics Treaty, and they likened it to the nationally defined contributions for the Paris Agreement. When we do NDCs, we've already got 10 or 15 years experience of how to measure carbon. We understand the methodologies, we understand the approaches. When we come to plastics, we're still learning. We don't have that background. So de-risking, understanding the projects, understanding the capacity, understanding the opportunities, and how do we overcome those risks? How do we mitigate them? How do we avoid them? So de-risking, critical part of what we're going to talk about. So next slide, please. So again, very brief rundown of public and private financing, government ministries, public agencies, development finance institutions, multilateral environment funds. These are all stuff that we're familiar with all the time. What we do need to start to understand, and something that I need to learn more about, and we've got regular here from Circularity Capital, we have Andreas Thurman from ADB looking at blended finance, new and innovative ways of working different financing systems together to achieve outcomes. Institutional investors, asset managements, commercial banks. We all see these names, we all see these phrases, but we need to understand a bit better about which one, what each one is capable of, what motivates and drives each one, and how they can be fitted into the overall picture of what we're trying to achieve. Is it project finance? Is it programmatic finance? Is it grant aid? And certainly as the teams in this room, a greater understanding, which I hope we're going to achieve over the next 2 days, of exactly what each of those institutions, each of those funding sources, each of those mechanisms can achieve. And I do urge all of you, as I say, we've got some fantastic amount of knowledge in the room. If there are aspects of the finance that you don't understand or you don't really see how it fits in, please network, talk, ask questions. We'll be happy to introduce you to the experts so that you can better understand how to use them, how to utilize them, where they fit into the picture. Next slide, please. Institutional capacity needs. So as we say, there are a wide range of options. There are a huge, gambit available for us that spreads across public, through public-private partnership, into pure private activities. How you delineate that in an individual country or an individual value chain alters. There are certain breakpoints, and they move depending on which sector you're looking at, whether it's agriculture, whether it's food and beverage. As we say, our governments have been tasked with developing and implementing plans, and Mr. Hung from VASI and the team at Esponre in Vietnam, we spent a week last week just understanding how Vietnam can begin to work on the Global Plastics Treaty. So it's not just a question of ratifying, it's a question of working with it to look at how do we set a baseline, how do we monitor it, how do we set targets, how do we achieve compliance, how do we demonstrate compliance. So as you look at it as a government, as the capacity you need to build, there's a huge range of ideas, concepts that you need to involve, and part of the work of this TA, the Indonesian resident mission, Anna, the rest of ADB's technical team, investments teams, is working out how to facilitate that, get ahead of it. So Vincent and the team have been doing a lot of digital work, a lot of monitoring work. We're talking with some of our specialists about looking at remote monitoring, about AI, digital recognition, to demonstrate compliance, to demonstrate reduction in the environment. How do you achieve that? How do you fund that? Where does it fit into the overall plastics picture? So I think that is our last slide. So have a wonderful workshop. We're going to have a photo now. You're going to have some coffee, and then we are actually going to have to do some work. So I think perhaps hand over to Pierre. Everybody up here, behave yourselves. We'll get a photo, and then we can have some coffee.
Thank you, James.